If you haven't subscribed yet, now's the time. When the channel reaches 1,000 subscribers, I'll share a surprise story I've prepared especially for you. The airstrip looked unfinished even after months of work. Just a long, rough line of compacted earth cut into the dense green of the Pacific island. Heat rose from the ground in thin waves. The engines of P-51 Mustangs never fully stopped. Mechanics started one, shut down another, tested a third. The combined noise formed a constant background hum that made conversations short and movements sharp. Dust stuck to sweat, clothes, equipment, everything. Inside the communications tent, Elise Tanaka sat at a narrow wooden desk crowded with a radio set, signal sheets, and a half-filled logbook. The tent was dim despite daylight, two small fans rotating pointlessly overhead. Humidity made the pages of her notebook curl. She adjusted the headphones, checking frequencies with practiced movements. She worked without wasted motion, partly because discipline mattered, partly because she needed something predictable to hold on to. She knew exactly why she was here. She had enlisted as a radio operator to prove something, that she was American enough, loyal enough, useful enough. But the truth followed her everywhere. Her parents and siblings had been taken to an internment camp in California. Their letters stopped months ago. Each day, she wondered if something had happened to them. Each night, she told herself to focus on the next shift because thinking too long about home made it harder to breathe. She felt the pressure of being watched, even when no one looked directly at her. Some soldiers stiffened when she passed. Others made small comments under their breath. None of this surprised her anymore. What affected her more was the isolation, sitting for hours with nothing but static and coded call signs, feeling the weight of being useful but not accepted. She hid the stress behind strict posture and clear speech. If she let any of it show, someone might twist it into suspicion. Outside, Liam Hadley walked the perimeter of his Mustang, touching each inspection point with steady, deliberate motions. Sunlight reflected off the metal skin. His flight suit clung to his back. His gloves were already damp before the mission even began. He checked the ammunition feeds, the external tanks, and the alignment of the control surfaces while the crew chief followed behind him with a checklist. He didn't talk much, not because he disliked anyone, but because conversation made him think of his brother. His younger brother had died almost a year earlier. Tail gunner on 8B-24 that had taken heavy fire, lost two engines, and crashed into the sea. Liam survived only because a piece of wreckage drifted up under him. He climbed onto it and waited for rescue while waves slapped against him, and he listened to yelling that faded too quickly. He carried that memory like a constant pulse beneath everything he did. People around the base thought Liam was fearless. They said he flew with a calmness no one else had. In reality, the calm came from exhaustion. He couldn't afford to feel too much in the air. Fear took energy, and he needed all of it to fly clean, make decisions fast, and keep bombers alive long enough to reach home. His mission was simple in writing, but brutal in practice. Escort long-range bombing runs over enemy territory, fight off the remaining Japanese fighters, and get back with enough fuel to land. That was all command expected, but it was enough to break most pilots if they thought too hard about it. Liam didn't think about it. He followed the checklist, strapped in, took off, engaged, returned. It kept him moving forward. The alternative was thinking about the crash. Late in the day, as Elise logged incoming reports, the radio crackled with the first sign that the squadron was returning. She recognized certain voices instantly, including Liam's call sign. The tone told her more than the words: strain, fuel checks, altitude calls. She leaned closer to the receiver, writing down each update, marking the changes in a tight, precise script. Minutes later, the field outside shifted into a rush of activity. Mechanics positioned wheel chocks. Medics jogged toward the edge of the runway. Elise stood for the first time in an hour, the headphones hanging around her neck. Something in Liam's last transmission, tight breaths between words, made her restless. The first Mustang touched down cleanly. A second followed with a wobble. Then Liam's appeared, lower than the rest, one wing dipping slightly. Fuel leaked from a seam near the fuselage. The landing gear extended unevenly, and when the tires hit the ground, one bounced hard and the aircraft swerved. For a moment, she expected it to spin out or collapse. Instead, it fought forward, slowed, and finally rolled to a stop with a grinding noise that made the ground crews wince. When Liam climbed out, he didn't stumble or shout. He simply steadied himself against the wing, breathing hard, sweat streaking the dust on his face. Mechanic crews asked for reports. He answered with short sentences, focusing on what mattered: engine temperature, fuel state, bullet strikes. Elise stepped out of the tent with a clipboard and the mission form. She wasn't required to hand it to him personally. She could have given it to a runner. But curiosity pushed her forward. She wanted to see him up close, not just as a voice through static. Liam noticed her before she reached him. His expression didn't change, but he straightened a little. "Hadley, sign for debrief," she said, keeping her tone neutral. He took the clipboard carefully, as if his hands were heavier than usual. "Thanks." His handwriting was slow but steady. The pen shook once when he paused to consider a line. Elise watched, not because she meant to stare, but because she recognized the look in his eyes, the exhausted relief of someone who had spent hours unsure they would ever stand on solid ground again. She wanted to say something supportive, something normal. Nothing came. She handed him the rest of the papers and stepped back. "You okay?" Liam asked, his voice low and even more out of habit than curiosity. "I'm fine," she said quickly. "You came in with less fuel than expected. Used more than planned." He glanced back at the torn metal on the tail. Fighters were stubborn today. There was no bravado in his voice, no attempt to impress, just a fact spoken by someone who had seen too much to dramatize anything. Their conversation ended there. No forced smiles, no awkward gestures, just two people standing under a field lamp, sweat drying on their skin, dust settling on their boots, both feeling the strain of their own private history. As Liam walked away toward the medic station, Elise returned to her tent. She sat down, placed the headphones back over her ears, and stared at the logbook without writing. The sound of distant engines filled the space around her. She tried to push her emotions down the way she always did, but her hands trembled slightly. She didn't know why his landing affected her so strongly. Maybe it was hearing someone fight so hard to return. Maybe it was the simple gratitude he showed her, something she rarely received from anyone. Maybe it was because when their eyes met, she saw something familiar: the controlled fear, the quiet endurance, the heavy loneliness. Whatever it was, it stayed with her as the engines shut down one by one and the night closed over the island. The night after Liam's rough landing stretched across the island in a thick, warm blanket. The lights along the runway faded one by one until only the distant generator hum broke the silence. Elise stayed in the communications tent longer than her shift required, pretending to organize log sheets while her mind replayed the sound of Liam's strained voice over the radio and the way he had steadied himself against the wing. She wondered if he was resting, or if he was like most pilots and unable to sleep after a mission that dragged him close to the edge. In Chapter 1, listeners were left unsure about several things. Why does Elise continue to isolate herself, even when a few men treat her fairly? What does a normal day look like for Liam when he isn't in the cockpit? How does the tension between her heritage and her service actually play out in daily routines? These unanswered pieces create gaps in understanding. Not the dramatic kind, but the small, human ones that shape why these two people move the way they do. Chapter 2 picks up exactly where these questions linger. Elise left the tent when dawn approached, stepping into the sticky, early morning air. The sky was pale blue. Ground crews were already awake. Someone tested an engine toward the far end of the strip, the sound cutting clean through the humid air. She walked toward the mess area. Not for breakfast, she rarely ate with others, but for a cup of wheat coffee that helped her get through the morning shift. She kept her eyes low, aware of how easily one look from her could trigger stares or whispers. But something felt slightly different today. A few men moved aside without the usual hesitation. One of them nodded at her with a short, polite gesture. It wasn't friendliness, but it wasn't hostility either. Only later would she realize this shift came from a single sentence Liam had spoken the previous night, calm, direct, and witnessed by men who respected him more than anyone on the base. She didn't know that yet. She carried her coffee back toward the tent. That was when she saw him. Liam stood under the wing of his Mustang, already back to work. His flight suit was rolled down to his waist, his shirt clinging to him in the humidity. He studied the patched metal near the tail with a focused, unreadable expression. The crew chief briefed him on repairs, but Liam barely responded. He seemed lost in thought, going over every moment of yesterday's mission, trying to decide whether he made the right choices, whether he hesitated anywhere, whether something could have gone wrong that didn't. For pilots like him, the danger wasn't only in the air. The real risk was carrying the mission home in your head until you couldn't breathe without reliving it. Elise hesitated before approaching. She wasn't sure if she had a reason to speak to him. She wasn't even certain he'd remember their exchange from the night before, or if she was just another uniform in the background of his exhausting day. Still, she walked closer. Liam turned when he heard footsteps. His expression softened slightly. Not a smile, but a quiet recognition. That alone made her chest tighten. "Morning," he said. She stopped a few feet from him, unsure if she should come closer. "You're already back at it." He glanced at the damaged tail again. "The faster we fix it, the sooner I stop thinking about it." It was an honest answer, spoken in the same plain, unpolished tone he used with crew chiefs. Elise appreciated that. Most men talked around their fear. He didn't. "I heard the debrief," she said carefully. "It was a difficult run." He took a slow breath. "Could have gone worse." Then, after a pause, "Could have gone a lot worse." She caught that hesitation and understood it as clearly as if he'd said it outright. He had been close to not coming back, and he knew it. She offered him the rest of her coffee, barely warm, not particularly pleasant, but still a gesture. Liam studied her for a second, as if trying to decide whether accepting something from her would bring trouble to her or him. Then he reached out and took it. "Thanks," he said, and drank without complaint. That moment answered another unspoken question from Chapter 1. Why does Elise still keep her distance from people who might treat her with fairness? The answer became clear when two mechanics, passing by, looked at her with a mix of surprise and uncertainty. Elise was used to this kind of attention, but today the reaction made her uncomfortable. She didn't want Liam to deal with it. She didn't want to be the cause of any friction. She stepped back slightly. "I should get to work, right?" he replied, handing back the empty cup. As she walked toward the tent, she felt the nervous pressure building in her chest. She knew she had revealed more than she intended. She had allowed herself a moment of normal interaction, a moment of human warmth, and it frightened her. She had learned, over months, that warmth often came with consequences: mistrust, suspicion, or worse, pity. Inside the tent, she slipped the headphones over her ears, grateful for the familiar hiss of static. It was easier to disappear inside her work than inside her thoughts. Hours passed. Radio calls came and went. Positions, weather reports, routine confirmations. But every now and then, she found herself glancing at the tent flap, expecting to see the silhouette of a pilot or a messenger. She didn't know what she wanted to see. Late in the afternoon, a sudden shift in the weather trapped a heavy storm over the island. Rain hammered the canvas roof so hard that she couldn't hear the typewriter 2 desks away. Lightning flashed through gaps in the tent wall. Flights were grounded. Operations slowed to a crawl. Liam appeared in the doorway just as the rain reached its worst. He didn't enter immediately. He brushed water off his sleeves, then stepped inside carefully, as if unsure whether he was intruding. "You stuck too?" Elise asked quietly. He nodded. "Can't get back to the barracks without swimming." She pointed to a spare stool near the table. He sat down, stretching his legs slightly, his boots dripping onto the dirt floor. He didn't talk. He didn't fidget. He simply existed in the same space, giving her presence a quiet anchor. Elise pretended to check frequency bands. In truth, she watched him out of the corner of her eye. He seemed calmer than he had earlier in the day, but there was something heavy in him, something he carried alone because it was easier that way. A question from Chapter 1 lingered. What does Liam actually fear now? The answer began forming in the space between them. He wasn't afraid of flying. He wasn't even afraid of dying. What he feared was the moment before death, the silence where he'd be alone again, floating in open water with no one coming. Eventually, he spoke. "You stay here alone a lot," he said. She kept her eyes on the dials. "It's my job. I didn't mean the work," he added slowly. "I meant you." Her hands stopped moving. This was the question she knew someone would ask eventually, but she never expected it from him. She answered honestly, even if it made her voice tight. "It's easier to be alone than to feel like you don't belong." He didn't argue. He didn't try to reassure her. He absorbed the truth of it, nodded once, and sat quietly beside her. The silence felt safe. When the rain finally weakened, Liam stood. "If you ever want someone nearby when it gets this bad again, I'm usually around." Her throat tightened. She didn't know what to say, so she didn't say anything. She just looked at him, and he understood that she had heard him clearly. He left the tent with slow, steady steps, glancing back once. After he disappeared into the damp evening, Elise lowered her head into her hands. For the first time since arriving on the island, she felt something shift inside her. Not hope, not comfort, but the possibility of both. And that was enough to change everything that followed. The rain faded by the time evening settled over the airstrip, leaving the ground soft and the air thick with the smell of wet soil and fuel. Mechanics worked under lamps, their shadows stretching across the mud. The storm had calmed the island for a few hours, but the routine never truly stopped. Flights scheduled for the next morning were still on the board. Orders still changed without warning. Pilots still prepared for missions long before dawn. Elise remained in the communications tent after Liam left. She reorganized frequency sheets, rewrote log entries, and checked the equipment twice even though nothing had changed. She wasn't avoiding the barracks. She was avoiding the silence that waited there. In Chapter 1 and 2, listeners saw glimpses of her isolation, but one question remained unspoken. Why doesn't she write to her family anymore? Why doesn't she try to reach them? The truth rose up in her chest as she sat alone. She didn't write because she didn't want to imagine the letters never reaching them. She didn't want to picture a guard throwing her envelope into a bin. She didn't want to wonder if her family even had the emotional space to read it. Keeping silent hurt, but hoping for answers hurt more. She rubbed her forehead and forced herself back to her work. The buzz of the radio comforted her the way quiet connections sometimes do. The storm had brought a different kind of clarity. Liam's presence had eased the tension she carried, even if she didn't fully understand why. Outside, Liam walked toward the mess tent, though he wasn't hungry. After the storm, he often felt a heaviness in his chest. The sound of rain reminded him of floating on the ocean's surface, waves hitting his face, water filling his ears, his brother's voice gone too quickly. Most days he buried the memory deep, but storms dragged it back out. He tried to ignore it the same way he ignored the thoughts of the mission briefing posted for the following morning. He found a seat near the far edge of the dining area. A few pilots nodded at him, but no one approached. They respected his quiet, and they didn't want to disturb it. The base understood grief, even if it didn't always show kindness. He finished his coffee and left. Instead of walking toward his barracks, he hesitated and turned back toward the communications tent. He didn't have a reason to go there. Nothing official, nothing practical. But something pulled him in that direction anyway. When he stepped inside, Elise looked up quickly. She didn't smile, but something in her eyes loosened, like she no longer had to brace herself. "You're still working," he said. "I'm just organizing." He recognized the tone. He used the same one when he pretended exhaustion didn't bother him. He walked closer and sat on the spare stool without asking. They remained silent for a moment, the ease between them growing without either of them naming it. The unanswered questions from earlier chapters lingered in the air. Did Liam think about leaving the service after his brother died? Why is he still flying these missions? What exactly keeps him in the air? He exhaled slowly, and the tension in his shoulders told Elise something important was coming. "I thought about quitting," he said quietly. After the crash, she placed her pencil down. "Why didn't you?" He rubbed his thumb against the edge of his glove. "Because I didn't want my brother's last fight to feel unfinished. He protected his crew to the end." The least I can do is stay in the fight until it's done. Elise absorbed this without speaking. She didn't offer comfort. She understood some truths didn't need softening. They simply needed to be witnessed. "And you?" he asked. "Do you ever think about leaving this place?" She stared at the radio set for a long moment. "I don't have anywhere to go." "Not yet." He didn't push further. He didn't ask questions she wasn't ready to answer. Instead, he leaned back slightly and listened as she explained small things about her job, details he had never asked anyone else about. How she tracked transmissions, how she memorized call signs, how she filtered panic out of voices before relaying them. Her competence impressed him more than anything. A call over the loudspeaker interrupted them. Briefing for tomorrow's long-range escort mission moved to 0500 hours. All pilots report. Liam stood slowly. "They're moving it up," he said. "That's not a good sign." "It means the target's changed," Elise replied softly. "Or intelligence found something new." He studied her with a focused expression. "You'll be on the radio for it?" "Yes." He nodded once, as if grounding himself in that fact. The next morning approached quickly. They walked out of the tent together, stopping just outside under the fading storm clouds. The air smelled of wet dirt and engine oil. The lamps flickered with dying power. Liam looked at her in the quiet. "If things go bad tomorrow, if transmissions get messy, stay calm. I'll be listening for your voice." Her breath caught slightly. "And if you need help, I'll be here." It was the closest thing they had exchanged to a promise. No romance, no gesture, just two people acknowledging a connection forged from loneliness, duty, and the need for someone stable in chaotic surroundings. He stepped away first. She watched him walk along the muddy path toward the pilot's quarters, shoulders stiff but steady, the kind of steadiness that came from experience and pain. Inside the tent again, Elise reviewed the mission sheet. The route went deeper into enemy territory than usual. Longer flight time, higher fuel risk, more chances for interception. She pressed her fingertips against her temples and tried to control her breathing. She knew exactly what this mission meant for Liam and the other pilots. She also knew what losing contact would mean for her. The fear crept in slowly, forming a tight knot under her ribs. But she didn't look away from the sheet. She didn't hide. When the generators shut down for the night and the island fell silent again, Elise sat at the table, staring at Liam's call sign written at the top of a clean page. She traced her finger over it once, steadying herself. Tomorrow would test everything: her discipline, his endurance, and the fragile trust forming between them. And neither of them could afford a break. The island was still dark when a wake-up siren echoed through the camp. Pilots stumbled out of their quarters, fastening flight suits, rubbing sleep from their eyes, and heading toward the operations hut with the slow determination of men who had done this too many times. The ground was still soft from the storm, and the air held the heavy chill that came right before sunrise. Elise was already in the communications tent, sitting upright at her table, headphones ready, pencils aligned. She hadn't slept. The fear that settled inside her during the previous chapter had not faded. It had only sharpened. She scanned the mission sheet again, tracing the route that led deep over enemy waters. She imagined Liam somewhere in that space, alone, wings steady, trying to return as he always did. In the previous chapters, listeners were left wondering something subtle but important. How prepared is Elise to handle a large-scale crisis? What has her training really equipped her for? Chapter 4 answers that question plainly. She had been trained to remain calm through chaos, to separate fear from action, to filter emotion out of incoming transmissions. And despite her quiet loneliness, despite her private grief, she carried those skills like armor. The pilots gathered for briefing. Liam stood near the back, leaning against the wall. His face looked pale under the hard electric light. He listened to the route, the projected enemy positions, the fuel calculations. All of it was familiar, but his chest tightened a little more each time the officer mentioned extended flight time. He thought again of Elise's quiet promise. "I'll be here." It steadied him more than he expected. He checked his gear afterward, buckling straps and sliding gloves into place with mechanical precision. The other pilots joked softly about the awful coffee, about the heat, about anything that wasn't fear. Liam ignored it. He kept seeing the flash of his brother's aircraft breaking apart in the sky. He forced the memory down, breathing through his nose until the shaking under his ribs slowed. Before climbing into his Mustang, he glanced toward the communications tent. He didn't know if Elise was looking back, but the sight of the tent itself, the place where her voice would come from, was enough. The engine started. Dust kicked into the morning air. Propellers blurred into spinning discs of metal and light. One by one, the Mustangs rolled forward, took the runway, and lifted into the sky. Inside the tent, Elise logged the departure in a steady hand. Her stomach tightened the moment she heard Liam's call sign confirm formation position. She forced her breathing into a slow, even rhythm. She had to focus. She had to be every bit as controlled as she claimed to be. Hours passed. The formation reached altitude. The ocean stretched below them in wide, silent emptiness. Elise listened as navigation updates came through, as the bombers signaled target approach, as the pilots checked fuel and oxygen levels. Then the tone changed. It always did. There was no warning, no clean shift. Just a sharper breath in a pilot's voice, a clipped phrase, a sudden alert. Bandits climbing, bearing 130. Elise straightened immediately. She felt the cold edge of fear slide down her back, but she forced her fingers to tighten around the pencil. Another voice came through, Liam's squadron leader ordering a break to intercept. Then Liam's voice, firm but strained. "For on our left. 2 diving." The bombers reported incoming fire. Elise logged everything in rapid strokes. Time, direction, engagement notes. She didn't look away from the page, even as her pulse raced. Listeners from earlier chapters had wondered, can Elise maintain her focus when someone she cares about is in danger? The answer unfolded now. She did not falter. Not once. The sky above the bombers erupted into chaos. Tracer fire streaked across open space. Pilots shouted positions over one another. Liam pulled his Mustang into a hard climb. Oxygen masked tight over his face, eyes locked onto the flicker of wings ahead. He fired, felt the recoil through the joystick, watched a Japanese fighter drop away in smoke. Another one slid behind him. He warned the others, rolled sharply, felt bullets rip across the tail. His breath hitched. His fuel gauge dipped slightly faster than planned. Combat power ate fuel quickly. He knew it. Elise didn't know it yet, but she would soon. "Elise, stretch your range. I need to stay on frequency 3, the operations officer said from behind her. She switched channels at once, her fingers shaking only after she pressed the button. Liam's voice came through clearer now, but thinner, threaded with static. "Losing altitude, enemy, still behind." Her throat closed for a second. She forced air into her lungs. "Call sign Hadley. Repeat your altitude." He didn't answer immediately. The delay tore into her. Finally, 12,000. Breaking off. Fuel not good. Not good. Not good meant maybe not enough to return. Someone from operations leaned in and whispered, "If he's separated, he's on borrowed time." Elise didn't look at them. She stared forward, refusing to let her voice shake. She repeated instructions steadily, giving Liam the route back toward the main formation, offering headings, relaying wind direction. She filled the silence with precise information because silence meant danger. Silence meant she might never hear his voice again. Liam turned into cloud cover, the cockpit shaking violently as he cut speed to lose the enemy. He felt the plane rattle under him, the engine growling with strain. For a long moment, there was nothing but static. Elise pressed the headset tighter against her ears. "Call sign Hadley, respond." "Hadley, do you copy?" Her voice was calm on the surface, but cracking underneath. Nothing. She imagined the ocean swallowing another plane. She imagined a voice cutting off like her family's letters. She imagined waiting at a desk for news that never came. Her breathing picked up. Her hands clenched so hard her nails dug into her palms. She stared at the silent frequency, waiting, refusing to blink. Then, "Copy. I'm here," broke the cloud layer. Trying to level out. She exhaled hard, the sound almost a sob, but she swallowed it down and went back to work. Hadley, give fuel state. Low. Very low. She checked the map, calculated distance, factored in wind. She gave him the heading he needed, even though the margin was terrible. For the next 40 minutes, she guided him with short, clipped instructions. He followed, fighting exhaustion, fighting the memory of drifting in the water after the crash, fighting the thought of Elise waiting for a voice that might vanish. Eventually, Liam broke through the last layer of cloud and caught sight of the island, small, dark against the bright water. He whispered into the mic, not intending her to hear it. Not again. Not dying out here again. But the radio caught it, faint and cracked. Elise heard every word. Ground crews spotted his Mustang too low, too fast, cutting toward the strip in a desperate angle. Fuel fumes leaked behind him. The landing gear rattled. The left tire looked barely functional. He dropped onto the ground hard. The tire burst. The plane skidded sideways, kicking up dirt and smoke. Mechanics ran before the aircraft had even fully stopped. Elise tore the headphones off and ran outside before she realized she was moving. She reached the edge of the field in time to see Liam climb out of the cockpit and collapse against the wing, breathing in short, shaky bursts. He was alive. Her knees went weak with relief. Liam stayed against the wing of his Mustang longer than he intended. The aircraft still rattled softly as the engine cooled. Fuel vapors drifted in the air. Mechanics circled the plane with flashlights, calling out damages and numbers, but their voices faded into the background. Liam barely heard any of it. His hands shook uncontrollably, something that rarely happened, even after the worst missions. He tried to hide it, but he could feel the tremor running from his fingertips to his shoulders. In Chapter 4, listeners saw the fear he carried, but one question remained. What does Liam actually feel when he survives something he was sure would kill him? This chapter starts by answering that plainly. He felt relief, sharp, overwhelming relief, but beneath it was something deeper, heavier. The knowledge that he had fought his way back not only because he refused to die, but because someone on the ground had been waiting for him. Someone who cared. Someone who had spoken through the radio with steady control, even while breaking inside. Elise. She stood a short distance away, unsure if she should approach. The tension of Chapter 4 still gripped her chest. She had run across the field before she even realized she was moving, but now that she saw him upright, breathing, alive, she didn't know what to do next. She had offered him instructions, composure, and efficiency over the air, but she had no idea how to speak to him now, face to face, when her own hands still trembled from everything she had felt. Liam noticed her before anyone else did. He straightened up slowly, pushed off the wing, and walked toward her with careful, unsteady steps. The moment he reached her, the noise around them seemed to fade. "You got me home," he said quietly, his voice rough from the oxygen mask and stress. Elise swallowed hard. "You did that yourself. I just gave you the numbers." He shook his head. "No. When the radio went quiet, I thought that was it. When your voice came back, everything straightened out." He paused, jaw tightening. "I'm not good at saying things like this, Elise. But if you weren't there, I was there," she said, cutting him off gently. That's what mattered. The unanswered question from earlier chapters. Why does Elise continue to isolate herself if she's so capable, so strong? Began to resolve now. Because carrying this deeply frightened her. Because losing someone again would tear her apart. Because she wasn't sure she had the strength to survive another silence like the one after her family's letters stopped. But today proved something different. She wasn't as alone as she believed. Hours later, after the plane was pushed into the maintenance hangar and the field cleared, the night settled quietly over the island. Liam sat outside the communications tent on a wooden supply crate, his posture slightly hunched, his eyes distant but clearer than they had been earlier. Elise stepped out of the tent, hesitating in the doorway. She had finished her shift, but she couldn't bring herself to walk away. She approached him slowly, sitting beside him with a careful distance. The storm from the previous night had left patches of wet earth, and the air smelled of ocean wind and oil. "Do you want to talk about it?" she asked softly. He shook his head. "Not the mission." She nodded, Waiting. After a long moment, Liam spoke. I heard something in the radio. When I thought I was losing altitude for good. Her breath caught slightly. She knew exactly what he meant. She hadn't intended for him to hear it, but the desperation in that moment had escaped her control. You whisper my name. Elise looked down at her hands. I thought the channel was breaking. I didn't think you'd hear that. I did, he said, and it pushed me harder than anything today. The truth hung between them. Quiet, heavy, undeniable. And you? Liam asked. When I went silent, what did you think? She hesitated at first, but this was the final chapter. She refused to hide anymore. I thought I'd lost someone again, she said. Someone who mattered. I wasn't ready for that. He absorbed her admission with a calm seriousness. Not surprise, not shock, just understanding. Come with me, he said gently, standing up. She followed him toward the edge of the runway, where the lamps cast long shadows across the packed earth. There, under the faint light, he spoke with a steadiness she had never heard from him before. I'm supposed to rotate home soon, he said. They'll start sending pilots back now that the war's nearly over. She felt her chest tighten. She had known this was coming. Pilots didn't stay forever. The war was changing. Assignments were shifting. She wasn't ready for him to leave. He continued, but I'm not going without you. Wherever your family is, wherever you're sent, I'll go with you. She stared at him, speechless. He stepped closer, not touching her, just standing near enough that she felt the warmth from his body. I don't want to go back to living alone. Not after all this. Not after you. A question that had hovered since chapter 1. Are they just two lonely people surviving through proximity, or do they choose each other? Finally received its answer. They chose each other. Elise's eyes stung, not with fear this time, but with relief, steady, grounded relief. She nodded slowly, one hand rising to grip his sleeve, her fingers curling into the fabric. I don't want you to go without me either, she said softly. Not anymore. The night deepened around them. No dramatic music, no grand gestures, just a quiet understanding that something had changed permanently. The war had taken enough from both of them. They refused to let it take what remained. Weeks passed. The mission tempo slowed. Transport lists went up, and one morning, a bundle of delayed mail arrived from the mainland. Elise sifted through the envelopes with trembling hands and froze when she saw her family's handwriting. She opened the letter outside, under a patch of sunlight. Her parents were alive. They missed her. They hoped for the war's end. The relief hit her so sharply she had to sit down on the steps of the tent. Liam found her there minutes later, reading the letter for a second time, because she needed to prove it was real. When she handed him the envelope, unable to speak, he knelt in front of her, placing his hands over hers in the most natural gesture of support either of them had ever given. They're alive, she whispered. They're really alive. He nodded. Then we'll go find them together. And they did. 2 weeks later, as the truck carried them toward the pier to board a transport home, Elise rested her head against Liam's shoulder while he kept an arm firmly around her. They weren't running from the war. They were leaving it behind with purpose. They weren't two broken people anymore. They were a team. The airstrip shrank in the distance behind them, just a strip of earth where two lonely lives had found direction again. Nothing was left unresolved. No questions remained. Their story ended with a choice, simple, quiet, and strong. They stayed together, and for the first time in years, both of them felt like they were going home.